Hello, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game and Fire in the Head production. So, just today's video is about Savage Kingdoms more specifically. I know the last one I talked about more generically travel and exploration in Dungeons and Dragons, or Savage Kingdoms, or whatever other game, Pathfinder, etc., and just how those rules could really apply to any system. It's just kind of a different way to think about different things because D&D doesn't really have a systematic travel and exploration system, kind of, but not really. And it was just a way to do it. But enough of that. Today's video is actually more about Savage Kingdoms. It's time for me to kind of do a little bit more about Savage Kingdoms. I know it's a very small indie game. I realize most people want to hear about D&D and stuff like that and all these other cool games that have coming out. But this is my little indie game, so we're going to talk about it today. So today is actually about the type of gamer that Savage Kingdoms, and I guess Red Sun as well back there, attracts. Both of these games of mine are very sword and sorcery-ish forward. One a little bit more than the other directly. A little grittier. They delve into legend and mythology a little bit more from the real world, but then I twist it into to make it fit in these settings because they're the same setting. It's a setting with a red sun giant. You probably already know there's two moons, stuff like that. Nothing super unusual. Otherwise, it's very much like our Earth. And that is the point in order to make the fantasy very grounded and people kind of can connect to it a little easier. People as in other players, but also other game masters that might run Savage Kingdoms or Red Sun or whatever, and just in general. So yeah, so what type of gamers are attracted to Savage Kingdoms? We'll say that specifically because the fourth edition of this will be coming out hopefully in the next couple of months. I have the core rulebook 95% written. I know I've mentioned this before. I still have 5% to go because I'm kind of leaving that open. Like I'm still doing the final bits of play testing with my play testers and my players, and I'm kind of leaving some of the stuff open for the final edit. And so otherwise, I probably would have been done with it like several months ago. So there's a few little plugins that need to happen, and there's probably some editing, definitely some editing that needs to happen. In some ways, I've overwritten parts of it. I've done that on purpose so that I can edit out some of it, and then put it into an a soon coming, hopefully, um, supplement known as Heroic Adventures, which I still have to get out for the Kickstarter people from this is like 2 or 3 years ago. I was like way behind on that. So that will get done. Um, so yeah, probably Mad Scribe Games will publish that one as well, which is really cool once we have this arrangement going between us. And when the core rule book comes out, so we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. But most likely there'll be a supplement after that. Hopefully not too many months down. So hopefully at the end of this year. So that'll be cool. But anyway, what kind of players are attracted? So we're just going to kind of spitball and chill today. I actually was going to film this outdoors. It's a lovely day here in the mountains of Western North Carolina. But my wife and I decided to kind of go on a lovely walk and stuff, and that was really cool. So I didn't want to mess with that nice little moment with my camera and crap like that talking to you guys. So I'm back home uh, in the house and doing this video here. So let's get right to it, right? I've rambled on enough, as I'm known to do. So the types of gamers, right, in general, are tabletop role-playing players. We have most people would kind of know this already. So you have your beer and pretzels gamers, as I call them, your casual gamers. The people are just really here to hang out with their friends, drink some beer, age appropriate, drink some Coke, pretzels, chips, Funyuns, Mountain Dew, like we used to do. Um, and that's fine. That's really their main draw to the game. Is really just it's a social thing. They hang out with their friends, and then the game's kind of cool too, but it's really kind of secondary. Then the other extreme of that is the hardcore gamers, which are there primarily for the game, um, and secondarily probably for the social stuff. Although it's really all one, right? But I'm just saying, like as far as priority goes, like the people are there specifically because they enjoy this game, this campaign, this game system, and then probably secondarily, maybe even tertiarily, they're there for the other players. Fortunately, I'm blessed with my in-person players, and some of the other players that I game with first are more in the latter category, which is what I prefer and probably where I would put myself in. I'm one of those guys that was, and I'm sure a lot of people was raised this way, but I think it was my dad, probably my mom too, that instilled into me that there's a time and place for everything. Like if you are showing up, and this is me as an actor too. If you're showing up to rehearsal, you're there to rehearse that show. All the other stuff is secondary or tertiary, like hanging out with people, having a good time. That's great. We want that. But primarily you're there to work. And the same with the gaming. You show up for the game session. We expect a 4 hour game session, 3 hour, 5 hour, whatever it is that we're doing. And that for the most part, 80, oh no, 90, 95% of the time we're in character and we take very short, very few breaks, if any. Like usually because we're adults, usually we just, the person goes and use the bathroom or gets something to drink when they need to. And they'll choose their moment because they realize they're not really in the scene. They're not in the scene or whatever. Occasionally I'll do like a real break, like, all right, people, let's take 5 or 10 or something like that. I do that with the youth kids that I run. Obviously, we need a more structured break system. But the adult gamers don't really have to worry about it. So, other than those moments that you've gone off to use the restroom or grab a bite to eat or something from the kitchen or something, um, you're at the table and we pretty much hit it pretty hard as far as gaming goes till the end of the session because that's why we're there for. And so I think Savage Kingdoms, fortunately, I'm very blessed for this to happen, is tends to be those latter people, the people I just mentioned. Whereas the casual beer and pretzels people, though I've known a few that play Savage Kingdoms, I don't think I know any of that are still like they checked it out for a while. It's cool. I like to hang out, whatever. But they really kind of faded into the distances either because the game was too, I don't want to say serious because that sounds ridiculous. Or maybe it wasn't for them. Maybe they didn't like the system or whatever. I don't think so, but they're probably not going to tell you to be nice, which is I respect that. I also respect when people tell me that hey, this mechanic is stupid or sucks, or you may want to look at it this way. Because yeah, I mean they could be right, or they could at least be. Even if they're wrong, at least it might make you look at that mechanic and go, "No, dude, really, it was. I think I had it right in the first place." Or, "Wow, you're right. That's a good point. I really need to probably look at that." So either or, it's a win-win, right? So, but my overall point, some of the people that just kind of check it out casually or have kind of gone back to D&D, which I consider kind of the ultimate casual game. Nothing. Obviously, I love Dungeons and Dragons. I grew up. This is why I'm still in this industry or this hobby. It also got me into acting and stuff like that. But let's face it, it's not. I mean, I run it for kids on the weekends for professionally and for summer camps, but as part of my living, in addition to acting and stuff. So I have to kind of supplement, like most actors, I have to supplement my income. So I do it because most of the kids like it. That's the only game they kind of know. But if you really know me, especially as an adult player, that's really not my favorite game. There's so many other game systems that do far better job. And what that job is I guess is another part of this video. And that job is, to me, is depends on the player and therefore the game master. Remember, the game master, the GM, the DM, the dungeon master is also a player per se. It's when you break it down into player, character, and game master is when it's different. But technically, everybody at the table is playing the game, right? So they're all players. The GM is not a player character, but he is a player of the game, right? He or she is involved in sort of running the game as the game master, hence why it's called that, meaning the master of the rules. It also kind of means like the game marshal, or the storyteller. He's kind of a director also, um, and a leading actor. He plays a lot of the NPCs or supporting roles, I should say, because the stars are the player characters, right? But I think Savage Kingdoms, and I did this on purpose when I designed it, and there's other games too that are, I'm sure, far better that mean to do this on purpose. Are really meant to draw in like the real fans of the genre. That's what I'm really going after. The casual people, that's great. The more the merrier. But it really resonates mostly with people that are fans of history, legend, mythology, um, to some degree religion, because a lot of that's tied into myth and mythology and spiritualism. It's kind of the foundation of humanity, and to some degree, I know a lot of modernists would kind of disagree, but there's a lot of things that are wrong on, so I'll move on from that. Although occasionally I have some good points on stuff, but let's be fair. So all of that stuff, I think, really contributes to true storytelling that's kind of deep in the soul, and that kind of transcends a tabletop role playing game. without sounding too cheesy and too bawdy, I suppose. Um, where we're sitting around the table, rolling dice to determine an outcome, um, and not just rolling dice to be rolling dice. And we're engaged in the story, what the game master has before us, what our characters have before us, what our fellow player characters have for us. Because if you've done theater before or film work as well, you're playing. All of these people around the table are helping you in your performance, helping you bounce off of each other and using proper improv techniques. Yes and yes, but no but is even fine. Where you're just kind of build anything that kind of builds on a story, and yeah, so that's all we're doing around the table, right? And it's the same as being around a campfire. Um, this goes way back. So if you take away the traditional round gaming table, knights of the round table, and then you're now around a campfire, right? So that's kind of what our ancestors were doing. They were telling stories around these campfires, around tables at times, around the feast table, um, around the campfire, and maybe they weren't using dice to make to make sure the rules engage, make sure we have probable chances of outcome. That's basically what they were doing. They were just telling stories instead of using dice, probably, because who knows? I mean, there were Romans have discovered every die type. We've discovered every die type that the Romans had, right, except for D10s, I believe. Um, Probably weren't using for role playing games, but maybe who knows? Uh, but they were still determining these stories, and maybe they some of the stories changed over the years, meaning that at somebody's campfire, the story changed, meaning that that character in that story did something different. So you see the pattern here, right? It becomes almost like a tabletop role playing game. It's just and strictly a TTRPG, as we call them, are now, nowadays are more hard coded, right? We have rules for a lot of stuff. Some game systems have very light rules, such as Fate Core. The Fate game, powered by the Apocalypse, is fairly light, but structured enough. I made Red Sun fairly light, but a little bit more structure because I like to present a little structure. I don't like games that are completely loosey goosey. I think that just takes us back to the campfire, which is fine, which is all because I love telling stories around the campfire. But I like to push it a little bit more into actual kind of game design. And then Savage Kingdoms falls in the between a 1 to 10 complexity is probably a 7, 6.5. Whereas D&D is probably a 6, as far as complexity goes. Of course, D&D has the problem sometimes of being an 8 complexity where it doesn't need to be, and then it's a 2 or 3 where it needs to be a little more complex. But anyway, that's a whole different ball of wax. And I'm sure that's true in Savage Kingdoms and Red Sun and many other games. So pretty much, I would go out on a limb here to say that every game is going to have some area. First of all, there's no perfect game, but there's going to be other games that like, wow, they really should have fleshed this part out a little bit more, and maybe they overdid it here, stuff like that. But anyway, bring us back to the original point. So somewhere in there, and the reason I was talking about complexity levels, sort of hardcore gamers in general are attracted more to the somewhat higher complexity games. Now, there might be an argument that storytelling based character players, which is the players I tend to gravitate towards, probably being as a performer, and a lot of performers and entertainers, or my players as well, actors particularly, kind of gravitate to my games because I present them that way. I like to use a lot of different character voices, a lot of storytelling techniques. I mean, I know we all do, but I really focus in on that stuff. And I try to let the game mechanics kind of provide, in my opinion, what they're supposed to be doing as kind of a skeletal background, right? As sort of the backbone to everything. So when you describe this cool thing happening, or you have this NPC with this weird power, 9 times out of 10, it's already hard coded in the rules, right? But you're just presenting them as a storyteller that it sounds like something really cool and unique. And there's a trick about doing that, and I should do another video and some more GMing tips. The ones I did in the past weren't like as many views as I thought they would be. Uh, but there's some really cool GMing tips about how to not use game terms that much. And what's really cool about that, not only is it helping your storytelling, your narration in particular, but the players a lot of times will be wow. They'll be like, "Oh wow, that thing's been in the book the whole time." It's just the way he described it was really really cool, and I think that's kind of a neat thing without having to use a game term. Um, In fact, I dance around game terms almost all the time. Now, occasionally I will have to say, if the player really is kind of confused, I'm like, no, it's this talent on page 79 that I'm talking about, or it's this spell on page 115 or whatever. I might say that. And maybe I'll even have an NPC say the actual name of whatever it is, because the name that I came up with, particularly the names for my talents and spells, I try to make somewhat poetic, like in game, like in fiction titles, if that makes any sense. So then I might actually use the actual phrase, but a lot of times I will use synonyms. I'll use other words to describe, to dance around a game mechanic in order for the narration and the game itself, or the fiction itself, the storytelling itself, to be more alive. And we're not thinking about d20s and um, skill points and talent points, all that stuff. So a little sidebar there. But all that to say that there's some players, in fact, I would say 30% of players that are probably in that category where they're pretty hardcore. What I mean by hardcore is more like hardcore in the storytelling sense. There's also hardcore players, and I'd say that's another 25 to 30% that are there more for the hardcore math, right? They're there for the almost like the left brain approach to it, whereas the creative stuff is kind of the right brain approach. And obviously, a marriage of the two is really what you want, and you are to a degree kind of going back with those depending on the person that you are. So there are players that commit hardcore to like the game mechanics of the structure of it and all the points and tweaks and optimizations that you can make. And then there's the storyteller hardcore people. And then hopefully, if you're lucky, you've got a combination of two, which I'm very fortunate to have. And I like to think myself is that way. Like I said, I probably lean a little more story, but as a game designer of a relatively complex game, obviously I had to put some decent game mechanics and bones in the flesh, that sort of thing. So we can all go back on. But then within those mechanics of Savage Kingdoms, I tried to simplify. Like, so my idea was like, well, I want to have some fairly hard mechanics to support almost anything you can do in the game, or at least suggest. As the GM would know that, oh, well, that's the basic thing. Oh, yeah, if I apply that to this, that totally would handle the situation. And so the way I tried to make that simpler is to use a single D20. So Savage Kingdoms only uses D20s. If you've played, you would know this already. If you've never heard of Savage Kingdoms or have heard of it, don't know much about it, maybe you didn't know that. So it just uses D20 on everything. The prime example is that attack and damage. So many games have, almost all of them have an attack roll or two hit roll, whatever you want to call it, and then there's a damage roll that's completely separate. So I wanted to get rid of that because I always felt like it was like a big disconnect, and it also slowed things down in the combat narration. So now in Savage Kingdoms, everything is on a D20, so your attack and damage is all there. Same with spells. You make a magical arts roll to see if the spell works first of all, and then whatever the number is also feeds into how powerful the spell is. Uh, and I know this probably not entirely unusual because you have degrees of success of other games, but it is pretty unusual attack and damage being on the one d20. I've only seen that. I think I mentioned this in past videos. I think maybe one very obscure game, maybe even more obscure than mine. And this is after I came out with myself, so it wasn't like me copying it. Even if I did copy it, that's fine. We all, game designers will all copy each other. There's like thousands of games out there, so it's going to be hard not to even not on purpose copy someone. But that one I thought was pretty unique, and I've only seen it, like I said, one time other. There was a guy at DragonCon that said he saw it in some obscure game too, but it might have been the same one that I saw, um, where attack and damage are off the same roll. Anyway, this video is not necessarily about that. I've done videos in the past about the attack and damage system of Savage Kingdoms. I'll probably do another one maybe at some point, a little more thorough and less rambly like I tend to do. Maybe I'll break it down a little bit more with some fancy graphics or something like that, like everybody wants. But right now, you're just getting the raw single take without editing, so diversion. But to bring us back to the original point, what was the point I was trying to make? So I tried to make the game mechanic the D20 thing where you didn't have to worry about all these other dice types, D12s and D8s and D6s and D4s and D10s and percentile dice and D30s and D12, 16s and D7s. You could just focus on the one die. You always knew this is going to, anytime we have to resolve an action, it's going to be a D20, and then it's going to have a modifier to it, which is usually an attribute, one of the 6 attributes. And then if you're proficient, if you have skill levels in a certain skill, that's already, but it's all on the sheet is one thing. It'll say +6 is the total thing. Maybe because it's +3 from your attribute that the skill's running off of, then another +3 for the 3 skill levels that you have in it. Skill level 3 meaning that you're adept in that skill. Novice is the first 2 levels. Adept is level 3 and 4 skill levels. Savage Kingdoms does not use the term level except in skills. I did that on purpose. There's a lot of terms I danced around, like I was mentioning earlier, that I got so sick of from D&D. As much as I love it, but oh my god, it just got over. The term level all the time and hit points. I'm just like, I'm not going to use any of those terms whatsoever, and I don't. The only time I use level, like I said, is for skill level. Otherwise, there is an advancement system of Savage Kingdoms, but it is literally called advancements instead of levels, because I'm not going to call something a skill level and an advancement a level. It gets very confusing. We all know how spell levels and the other terminology that level presents itself in D&D can be confusing to new players. Well, us older people have been playing it forever, like we intuit it exactly. But when you're first getting into D&D and there's like 4 different things used for the term level, it can get a little confusing. So that's another reason I chose to do that. But yeah, so if you're really into storytelling and legend craft, mythology, and that sort of thing, I think Savage Kingdoms is your game. I really try to make it borrow a lot without copying directly from, or resonates a good source from a lot of all around the world, particularly from all sorts of cultures. Now, particularly the cultures um, that I'm probably more influenced by, and this is probably from my own, ancestry or whatever, is probably Nordic and Celtic stuff. But I really love Mesoamerican stuff, Aztec. So we've got that. I love Arabic and Persian culture and mythology. So there's dashes of that as well into various realms and kingdoms and some of the other lands. So this whole campaign setting that covers you know the the equation of a lot of dark ages and ancient world cultures on Earth, and I did that on purpose in real history, without calling them that, and without being too direct. I would say inspired by. Um, if you really were to break it down, I mean, it's probably 10 or 20% of the culture being used, and the other 80% is made up from me and my in this old world. But as any like world builder will tell you, the way you ground your fantasy is that you base a lot of it in the real world, particularly if it's from the Middle Ages or Dark Ages or Ancients, whatever you're setting your RPG in, because that's an automatic shortcut. It's called templating. The player already has a template in their mind, like, oh, this I'm playing a Laurentian. It's like, oh, that's kind of like the Roman Empire. Oh, cool. So you already know like the basics of that culture without having to research all this, looking at what differences there actually are in Savage Kingdoms, which there are many, but the basic thing is there. Or if you play a Yun or Yuntillan, that's kind of based loosely on Mongolian culture. Or someone from Zaramad, the Zaramis, that's based on ancient Persian Empire. The Pridonian Islands are based on ancient Greece for the most part, and Ismandos is like ancient Spain. So yeah, Moldavia is like the Russia, more like Transylvania. Uh, just the template part of it. That's just the very basics of it, and then if you really look into the details of the culture and within the Savage Kingdom setting, there's a lot more to it. But that's the basis of it, and that's all done on purpose. And I think every other world builder does the same for that very reason. It's called shortcutting or templating. Whenever you create a setting or even a system supporting the setting that's too out there and foreign, and that's great if you can do it, and it's kind of fun to experiment with. Just know that the more you're gonna detach from what real life, real world people know, right? So if it's like, oh, this is a setting with 17 moons and it's all a race of dinosaurs and there's no humanoids that exist. I mean, that sounds cool, honestly. I fully admit, but there's going to be a lot to kind of get through because the players aren't really grounded. They don't really, their real life experience isn't attached to a planet with half gravity and 17 moons, or actually that would be even more gravity, probably most likely, and just all dinosaurs and no humanoids. Sounds cool, but kind of hard to attach to. bringing me back to the original point, if you're here for like a deeper, heavier role playing, then that's you kind of need that grounded fantasy a little bit more. It's a little bit more to draw from. And this is all fact based on observation of many years seeing players at the table um, in one type of game that's kind of gritty and grounded, and it's kind of based a little bit on mythology. Almost all 99% of the time, the players are more connected. That role playing is deeper than the game that's just kind of beer and pretzels or has kind of a hooky world, which is fine. It's fine if you want to play in a cutesy world because I think there's places for that. But don't expect a deeper, kind of heavier role play. It might be just as fun. It might even be funner, but more fun. But don't expect more of a deeper, what I call heroic setting. I know modern fantasy likes to use the term heroic role playing to be more like over the what I consider a superhero role playing game. But I'm using the term hero. I think I'm hoping a little bit more in the traditional sense of the word, where it's a little more your players are born maybe probably possibly a little slight cut above the of a commoner, but they still have to go out and do some gritty stuff and be heroic and act heroic and overcome some terrible obstacles and powerful creatures and other situations instead of just kind of breezing through it. To me, that's not heroic at all, really. It's just if anybody could just breeze through an ancient dragon, then first of all, what's the point in playing, right? Just or even telling the story. And then secondly, it's not really heroic at all, right? It's just it's something a god can do, so it's not really that big a deal. But anyway, so just think about something to think about, like what kind of players are for Savage Kingdoms. If you are looking for a game that's more deep role playing, connecting more to our ancient past, it's set more in the Dark Ages. So what we in the Earth, what we would call the Dark Ages of Earth, particularly in Europe, but also Dark Age. Uh, China, Persia, or equivalent thereof, African, and we have an African continent as well called Imanju. So though when I say Dark Ages, I am saying mostly what we call the Dark Ages after Rome pulled out of Britain, and there's the 400 or 500 years. A lot of that's kind of getting foggy now because history, archaeologists and historians are filling in that time frame a little bit more. We're finally getting more information, so it's not quite the Dark Ages as much as we thought. In fact, there were quite a number of inventions that were being done. A lot of people say it was kind of a backwards time, and maybe to a degree it was, but it was also a lot of heavy mysticism because of the fact that we're missing a lot of information from that period, and that's why I like setting Savage Kingdoms in the Dark Ages. That's my favorite. It gets overlooked a lot. The medieval period and the Renaissance period gets overdone, in my opinion. D&D is really kind of default high chivalry to even late Middle Ages. And then you got the ancient world, which I really love too, like Red Sun and Conan, which is loosely, but love that's my second favorite era. But between those two, there's this nice little area that doesn't get covered much, and that is kind of the Dark Ages, and that's where Savage Kingdoms is set, and that's why it's called Savage Kingdoms because originally, and still is, it was a sword and sorcery. In fact, it was billed as a heroic sword and sorcery role playing game. Now, for fourth edition, we've renamed it. The little tag is Dark Ages Fantasy Role Playing Games. I think that makes it stand out a little bit more. Even though it is largely sword and sorcery, there's a little bits of high fantasy sprinkled in without being high fantasy because that's not really my thing. But there's just enough in there to hopefully make it appeal to a broader, more amount of people. However, right, the sweet spot in the middle will the people that will love more like harder sword and sorcery, a little bit more grounded. Um, I wouldn't say low. It is low magic in a sense, but it's probably really more medium magic. It's definitely not high magic because to me, if everything's magical, nothing is. I follow that philosophy, and that's true with anything. I think not just magical spells and magical effects, but anything that I think even non-human characters in SK are very rare. It's supposed to be very rare because that makes them more special, right, when they're encountered. So anyway, that's enough rambling now. So just look for SK4E coming out in a couple of months, hopefully, at the core rulebook. And hopefully it'll attract even more of you really cool storyteller types who really want to get into some deeper sense of adventure and character development. I would definitely check it out. Runs on a single D20. It's pretty simple. And yeah, otherwise I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for staying to the end if you did.